faster in the 5K distance. Welcome back to the Run for PRs podcast, dedicated to helping you conquer your running goals and unleash your inner speed demon. I'm your host, Victoria Philippi, and let's be honest, in the world of distance running, the marathon often steals the spotlight. But at Run for PRs, we also specialize in the shorter distance events like the 5K. It's a distance that demands both raw power and tactical finesse. It's about pushing your limits, embracing the burn, and finding that extra gear when you think you have nothing left. Today, we're diving deep into strategies and secrets to racing the 5K to your absolute potential. We'll be busting some common myths, exploring training techniques specific to the 5K, and discussing how to develop your mental toughness needed to conquer this challenging distance. Whether you're a seasoned 5K runner looking to shave off a few seconds on your PR, or a new beginner eager to tackle your first ever race, this episode is packed with actionable advice to help you cross the finish line with a smile and feeling strong, maybe even with a new personal best. All right, let's get into those 6 key talking points we're going to cover in this podcast for unlocking your 5K speed. First, we'll be talking about how Speedwork is your secret weapon. Number 2, don't neglect your easy runs. Third, embrace the discomfort of the race. It's going to feel a lot different if you're used to those longer distance races. Number 4, we're going to dial in that race strategy. It's a little bit different than the marathon pacing strategies if you're used to that. Number 5, we are going to master the art of a kick and really work on that fast twitch muscle at the end of the race. And number 6, we're going to fuel your fire. What does nutrition and hydration look like leading into a 5K event? So diving in here, Speedwork being your secret weapon. So you're going to want to incorporate interval training, tempo runs, hill repeats to build speed, power, and increase your lactic threshold. We're going to discuss how to structure these workouts for maximum impact to really reach your potential in the 5K distance. Jason actually has a lot of experience coaching this distance specifically. He started coaching, I believe, was it back in 2008?
Yes, 2008.
And a lot of that was in the high school level, and I think, isn't that the race distance that they do for cross country?
Yep, back then it was 4K for girls, 5K for boys, and then it's since changed to 5K for both boys and girls. And so that's at the high school cross country level in our state of Minnesota. Some states still do a 3-mile, but most states are 5K. And then at the collegiate level, it jumps up to 8K for men and 6K for women at the D3 level. And then at the D1 level or D2, it's even higher. They go up to 10K for the national meet and the regional meets. But yeah, historically it's between 5K to 10K. That's cross country. And then on the track, we have distances as short as 800 meters that distance coaches are coaching, up to the mile, 3K, and the 5K and 10K.
Well, now that we have an expert 5K coach here, I think most of the coaches who do podcast work or a lot of the accounts you see on social media is really specific to the marathon and half marathon, and a lot of the content we even put out is really specific to that marathon and half, because I think that's a distance where most people are like a little bit scared, and so they think they need a coach or a training plan just to go the distance. And so that's really where a lot of these training plans come out of. But sometimes I think people, they underrate the 5K and they think they can maybe train themselves for it, or they think it's just like an afterthought. Whereas really you can get specific and really dial into workouts that are going to increase your speed. And it's actually really hard to get fast and to increase your VO2 max. So what are some of the things that you did or do as a coach to get an athlete to tap into their raw speed?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I'm sure we have listeners who, some maybe have never really raced 5Ks all out, and others who have maybe dabbled with it a little bit, maybe in between like their marathon training cycle and whatnot. So wherever you fall on the spectrum, you just want to think about it as if you want to get faster with the 5K, maybe start off with a more conservative approach. If you have some experience and you've been doing speed workouts then we can get a little bit more spicy, I guess, from the get-go. And so we always start with a progressive overload approach. The nice thing about coaching, high school athletes or college athletes is you not only see them in person, but you get to see what they're all doing in the same setting. And so a lot of times you get to learn about who ran this many miles over the summer, and you can get to the track. You can have them start off with just some strides, maybe 100 meters, and then you can just build from there. And so I would say, the first real speed workout might just be 4 to 6 by 100 meters, and that could just be just enough to get your legs taxed to get going fast again, right? And how long does it take to run 100 meters? It only maybe takes anywhere from 15 to 20 seconds for most young athletes. And so if you're not used to running fast, that would be the first speed workout. We can also insert strides into some of our easy runs at the end of the runs. So strides are typically an acceleration where we build up to 80 to 90% effort, and those can last anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I would say that probably a lot of people listening, if they are more experienced runners, I mean, when I hear you say that as someone that's done a ton of marathons, right, I can't help but wonder, okay, 4 to 6 by 100 meters. If I had a coach prescribe that to me, I would think that's not enough volume, but because you're taxing a different system, is it because you're really hoping to work on running form and really get that raw speed, so it's better to do less reps and really focus on the control and really going all out on those? And then what does the recovery look like in between each? Because 100 meters, it's if you're a distance runner, you could be out there doing that all day.
Yeah, I think form and efficiency is really key there. Right, getting your muscles firing, running tall, staying strong, and loose. You don't want to be super tight and tense, but you do want to practice running fast and light. And I think a nice flat surface like the track, it allows you to, be able to run without having to worry about stopping, right? And it's a nice flat surface, so you don't have to worry about changing your gait for a hill or for an intersection. And, I think there are going to be different types of workouts. So yeah, that might be a very introductory workout. Then we might get into a fartlek workout where you do something 8 times 45 seconds or 8 by a minute, something like that, where it's not going to be quite as fast as, you would be running 100 meters, but you're going to be covering anywhere from 200 to 300 meters in those fartlek type workouts. So that would kind of be the next place, and maybe the first place to start if you have some experience with doing 5Ks.
Right, and even just saying 45 seconds or 1 minute intervals, I think for the seasoned marathoner listening, they're thinking that's so short. And I think what some people do is they don't go that fast during the 1 minute, and then for the recovery, it's they're going too fast, so they're kind of in that gray zone. So we really want to polarize how fast you're going, and it's you're going really, really fast, and then I think in some of the recoveries, is it okay to then walk to get your heart rate down? Are we really looking to hit that VO2 max area for the majority of these workouts and really stress that system, or is it more of making sure we're never taking walk breaks?
Yeah, great question. Going back to the example of being on the track running those hundreds, absolutely you're walking, you're doing standing rest in between, because the goal is to prioritize the strong form I mentioned and really just allow your heart rate to come down so you can give it your all on the next rep. In terms of when you're doing a fartlek workout, kind of on the road, I think a lot of it will depend on your experience, right? You may feel like you need to walk in between, and that's fine. I tell a lot of my athletes if they're doing intervals or faster work, if you type in your 5K time or 1 mile time to VDOT, you can see your interval paces, but you can also see your repetition paces. And so I do have some athletes who are specifically trained to get fast, right? And so we're hitting those repetition paces. And in those cases, yes, we will be walking or standing recovery at times. A lot of times I'll say you can walk the first half of the recovery, then you can go into a slow jog. And that's kind of what we did back in high school and college was if we were doing, let's say, 800 meter repeats, we would get about 2 to 3 minutes recovery. We might need to walk for that first minute just to have our heart rate come back down.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast some of these workouts can be, and so you almost need that walking recovery because you're stressing a completely different system. But in terms of your own training, I always am curious. Back in the day, I think your fastest 5K, would you say that was under a 5 minute per mile pace?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just under.
So that's crazy to me how someone can run that fast. So let's say me or anyone, for example, listening is Okay, I have a goal to like just completely take off a ton of time off my 5K. Like, what if someone wanted to run that fast in the 5K? What is the approach to really trying to be as aggressive as possible, taking big time off, or really getting to that level of speed? Because I think sometimes we see people on social media, they're like hitting these times, and we're thinking, well, I want to be able to do that, or I should or could do that. How do I really get my speed down to that level?
Yeah, another great question. This is a complicated answer because it will depend on your experience, right? And what types of workouts you've done. Also, you need to be patient because this is not going to happen overnight. This can take several months to see progress. You know, when I think back to coaching or even my own season as like a high school athlete or a college athlete, it always seemed to take longer than I wanted it to experience the breakthrough in times, right? I expected to have it maybe a month into the season, but a lot of times it came much later. It came like 2 months into the season, right? And so these things can take 8 weeks to see, pretty significant results. And a lot of times it does require you to, we're going to be talking about some of the other points coming up, but find the right races, right? Gaining the experience, that is really key. So it's not just about the workouts, it's about the racing experience, and they definitely go hand in hand. But as far as some of the workouts that I think challenge me the most, I would say 400 meter repeats are very taxing because they are, anywhere from a minute to a minute 30 for most people that are running, around 20-minute 5K or faster. And so that would be, you get a lot of bang for your buck, and you might just do 4 of them, or you could do 10 of them. I think the heaviest workout we had during cross country season was 20 by 400s once. But a lot of times track season we were hitting like 8 of them or so, and they were a little bit faster. And so varying the pace, the effort, all this comes with experience. There are going to be times where you're hitting, mile effort. There's going to be times you're hitting 5K effort. And the recovery in between, you might manipulate a bit based on that effort. So if you're hitting 5K pace, recovery might be shorter. It might be 90 seconds or 2 minutes. If you're hitting mile pace, recovery might be 2.5 to 3.5 minutes in between.
Right. Okay, so speed work. As we say on all of our podcasts, you want to only be doing speed work for about like 20% of your weekly mileage or weekly volume. And the rest of it you shouldn't always be going hard. So maybe we are doing 1 or 2 of these per week. And that 20%, so when you're doing those like recovery jogs in between in your warm up and cool down, that's considered at an easy effort. So it doesn't count towards that 20%. So let's say you're running 20 miles a week right now. I think 20% of is that 4 miles worth of speed work. So let's say you cut that into 2 different workouts. Maybe one of them you're doing 8 by 400, and then the next one maybe you're doing 4 by 800 or something like that. And that would be your speed work for the week. And I think a lot of people, they hear, oh, I got to run faster to be faster, and they kind of get caught up in that whole mentality of I need to run faster. But what we often forget is you have to also have those easy days still, even though you're training for a 5K and you do want to get faster. The 5K is still 90% aerobic, and so your aerobic engine needs to be really revved up. I did see a funny reel the other day, and I don't know how relevant or how niche this is if people will understand, but who was the runner? They did the 1 mile of these track athletes, Olympians.
Oh.
The 200 meter gold
Gabby
medalist.
Thomas, right?
Yeah, Gabby Thomas. They had this 200 meter gold medalist from the last Olympics.
And some other Olympic athletes too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
These are Olympians in the track doing the 200 meters, their event in the Olympics, and they medal in it. Then they said, okay, we're going to up that. We're going to have you race 1 mile. And so that's only, it's like 8 times the distance. But it's 200 meters versus 1,600 meters. I don't know. When you're a distance runner, you tend to think, okay, if you can run 200 meters, you could probably, bang out a mile. But yeah, their mile times were really surprising to a lot of people, how quote unquote slow they were compared to how fast their 200 mile 200 meter pace was. And so I think they did it just under a 6-minute mile, which is still really fast, of course. But the fact that they have so much speed, you would think, hey, you know, if you can do 200 meters at this pace, you should be able to run, in like the 4-somethings for a mile, just based on what are the Olympic medalist women running in the mile, like in the 4s.
They run the 1500 outdoors, but I would say it converts to like a 430 something mile.
Right.
So, or, you know, 420s actually for like the top end, but.
So there's that delta of like, what are they missing? They're missing the aerobic engine. So 200-meter runners never go out and do slow, easy runs. They don't have the aerobic system. They have that anaerobic. They're able to go really fast, but as soon as it turns aerobic, it's not as well developed as those other runners. And so even the 1600-meter or the 5K runner for the Olympics, they're running quite a bit of mileage. I think they're anywhere between like 50 to 70 miles per week, depending on the athlete. And so one might think, wow, that's a lot of mileage just for a 1600 for a 1 mile event. And the bulk of that is still easy runs, because when we look at the event, it is an aerobic event in nature. And so for track, for example, at the college level, I know for you at River Falls, where you went, they would split the runners. And what was the event where there would be like a shorter distance coach versus the longer distance coach?
Yeah, that typically the middle distance was 4 and 800 meters. And then anyone that was going to run the mile or higher would be with the distance coach. And then they do have some events that are kind of in between those distances randomly, like the 1K at certain events, or if there's a medley relay, there might be someone running a 1200. Some athletes do also dabble with both the mile and the 800, and so I think they just typically will split time or, have an agreement. The coaches get together and discuss who should coach them, who's going to be the most impactful in terms of structuring their workouts. And it's interesting you bring up the Gabby Thomas example of those athletes. And I think none of them had like trained for it. I think it was just something they hopped in and they wanted to see how fast they could run. Yep. But, obviously with some proper training, I'm sure she could run significantly faster. But their training is really like what we would classify like as overspeed. So they're doing like sprints, right? Constantly. For 200 meter and 100 meter, those were her main events. I think she also ran a 400, but like on the relay. The longest she's probably running speed intervals is 300 to 500 meters. And so when we're talking about, the average adult runner here who's going to run 5Ks, we may sprinkle in that sort of overspeed, but I think a lot of that work that we're going to be doing is like that 400 to 800 meter range. So it's sort of like the speed endurance, right? Where we're running for anywhere from 1 to 2.5 to 3 minutes. Those are going to be sort of the bread and butter distances or durations that we want to get used to running faster paces, so we can tax our systems and elicit some new responses in our muscles, so we can hold the pace for longer.
Definitely. And it's been a while since I've done a 5K. I think it's been like 3 years. I'm a little intimidated of the distance, but the last time I was in decent 5K shape, it was like in the 6:0 pace range that I ran. And a lot of my easy runs leading up to that were in the 9s and 10s. So I'm going 3+ minutes per mile slower than my 5K pace on a lot of these easy runs. Granted, it was during marathon training, so it was higher mileage. So some people, they hear me say that and they think either A, I'm lying, or B, there's something wrong with my training. But I like to say, hey, go off your heart rate, go off of effort. And if it's 4 minutes per mile slower than your 5K pace, then that's where you're at. Could I run my easy runs at 2 minutes per mile slower than 5K pace? Sure, but I like to feel good throughout the day, and I'm just going off of what feels right to me. I don't think there's a specific pace range that you have to run in to classify your run as easy. I think people sometimes get caught up in the data and the numbers, so just remember that there's a lot of different ways that you can measure an easy run. You can go off of effort, you can go off of heart rate, which is what I usually go off of, and then there's also pace ranges that you can calculate either using VDOT, but I find that their easy range is very limiting. I like to think of that as your speed limit. So don't go any faster than your VDOT pace. You can go much slower. So our third point is embracing that discomfort. So as I alluded to before, I'm kind of scared of the 5K distance because I'm just not used to it. So racing a 5K is a completely different type of pain. It's just really tough, especially if you're used to the marathon. I think it's all about what you're used to, though. I remember when I was younger, I did a lot of 5Ks. We probably did like 10 a year, and they were easy. I wouldn't really get that nervous before because I was very familiar with exactly what the pain was going to be like. But when I did a marathon, now that was a different type of pain that I wasn't used to. And so now that it's kind of flipped, I can see that the 5K racing is tough in a different type of way. You really do have to train your mind to embrace the burn and really push through it. And so I think a lot of these speed workouts do help with that because you are doing that over speed where you're getting a lot of that burning, you're having the lactic buildup, you're reaching a point where you don't think you can go another step really at those paces. And so mental fortitude is really key here. So what are some things that you recommend to your athletes or you've done in the past that have helped you embrace the discomfort of a 5K?
Yeah, I think this starts with workouts, right? So when you have a workout on the schedule, let's say it's 5x1K, right? And so you want to approach that workout knowing like you're not going to run the second rep too fast, right? You want to make sure you finish that workout still feeling pretty strong on the fourth and fifth rep. And that goes with any speed workout. You want to make sure that, you can get to 75% of it still feeling pretty good. You don't want to be taxed. And so this can take a few attempts, right, of learning how to adjust your effort, and really kind of perfecting how you approach each interval in a workout. And so once you're able to kind of do that, I think to set yourself up for success in the 5K race, what you need to do is, set a goal that is attainable based on your workouts that you've ran. And what I made this mistake so many times over the years of like, I just set this time goal in my head and it was an arbitrary number that I wanted to hit because I just thought it sounded cool, right? And I definitely didn't have the recent workouts in my repertoire that supported that current time. But because I had done it years prior, I just thought, oh yeah, I'm in 16:30 shape or whatever it was, and so those races were very difficult for me. There were times we were in the Brian Craft 5K and I remember getting to the 1 mile and just being like, holy cow, I made a mistake going out too hard with this pack. How am I going to get through this? And so, having those experiences can actually benefit you down the road because it teaches you to sit in that discomfort, right? And you have to figure out, how am I going to adjust? Well, mentally you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to slow down 25 seconds per mile on this second mile and just try to lower my heart rate a little bit, run efficiently, and hopefully I can come back with a slightly faster third mile. So it's learning how to adjust your thought process as you go. And it kind of starts with workouts, and then hopefully it trickles over into races. And I think the more experience you get doing both, it just becomes more natural to be able to do that. But you definitely are right. It is a different beast if you're not used to pushing for, 20 to 25 minutes, however long it takes you to run the 5K. Is a lot different than running a half marathon or a marathon.
Definitely. And you're talking a little bit about like our next point, which is dialing in that race strategy. And so I think that is really important to figure out kind of what type of shape you are in going into the 5K and maybe setting a less aggressive goal, especially if you're someone that has a history like we do of, oh, I know in the past I've ran this time in the 5K. Sometimes we can compare where we're currently at, which is maybe on a comeback or the beginning of the season, and we're looking at what was our best time last year. Oh, I think I could, come closer to that. But in reality, if you're in the beginning of a season or if it's been a while, you might want to kind of set your expectations a little bit lower, at least for that first 5K. And I think for developing that mental strength, it is good to be able to do multiple attempts at these 5Ks. They don't take a ton out of you, so it's like you could do them every week, every couple of weeks, and be able to fully recover in between. Sometimes you just need that racing experience to really dial it in. And when you were talking about how, you did the Brian Craft 5K, you got to mile 1, and you were like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard. I was having a lot of visions of me pacing other athletes in races, or sometimes even doing a 5K that was an even split or negative split, because some of my athletes I've paced to 5Ks and they've even split or even negative split, and even during the race, it seemed like at mile 1, like they weren't really in a great place. And I think even if you pace a 5K appropriately and like you execute, I don't think at mile 1 you're like, wow, I feel great. Like,
right. That's
what's weird about it is like you could be at mile 1.5 and feel terrible and still like run even splits, negative splits, a good race, and you could feel terrible at mile 1.5 and completely like blow up. And so I think that's what's really challenging about the distance is it's hard to really know where you're at, and the margin for error is a lot smaller, right? So per mile in the marathon, it adds up, and so there's that. But also in a 5K, it's like a lot of times people just want to shave a couple seconds off, and so if you're a couple seconds off per mile, there goes your race. So it's interesting. I do think it takes quite a bit of practice.
Yeah, for sure. We've had a lot of athletes, that they maybe do one 5K, but then it's just part of like their early season training, and then they go back into their 10K, half marathon cycle. And so it's like, you need more than just one attempt at it. You need almost like a full season of just doing some 5Ks or doing some shorter races to really gain some confidence, gain some more experience and understanding of how to learn to embrace that discomfort, how to, push through those mental challenges. Because I can tell you there's so many 5Ks I've done over the years where, my times have varied a lot, usually by like a minute and a half, based on, where my fitness was at.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was always somewhere between like 15:30 and 17 minutes, roughly. But, always at mile 1, it feels fast no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do have to figure out, how do I calm my thoughts and just zone it out, try to just stick on my pace, trust my training, look forward to the end. So you learn about like positive things to tell yourself, right? Like the 5K is only, I usually tell myself it's like 10 or 15 minutes of pain, right? That's it. And then I'm going to get through it. And so it is a lot different than the marathon, where it's your legs are like preventing you from maybe going any faster, right? So I think a lot of it is mental for sure at this distance.
Yeah, and as you're talking, just coming to my own mind, I have a question for you regarding your 5Ks. Can you think of any 5Ks that you've done sub 16, so close to your PR? Of all of those times, were any of them during marathon training?
That's a good question. Probably not marathon specific, half marathon training.
Right.
But I don't know if I've ever ran a 5K in the middle of marathon training.
Or in the build-up.
But I
so
do.
No.
I don't think so.
And I was even thinking to myself, so I ran sub 19 just 3 times.
Well, I did run the Goldies. I think I ran low 16.
That's the only time, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 16:0 whatever.
But I feel like that was a short course.
Slightly short course.
It was a short course, so
we were in generally great shape back then, though. Both of us went on a run. I'm pretty sure that was like close to a PR at Boston a few weeks later.
But most of the times that you were in good 5K shape, or like your peak 5K shapes, right? So sub 16 for you, sub 19 for me. I can think of, I had no marathon on the calendar before or after. It's like I just was taking a step back from the marathon, and I had done maybe a few 5Ks, or I was really focusing on the speed work leading into it. And so I'm not saying that you have to take a break from the 5K, but what I am saying is, remember before I said 90% of the 5K is aerobic and the other 10% is anaerobic? So typically I'm more of like a 19:30 or just under 20-minute 5K runner. And so that extra 10%, when I was able to focus on the anaerobic, that was what was able to push me down into the sub 19 range, because I wasn't focused on marathon training. And so I don't really think I gained a ton of, my VO2 max didn't like improve a ton during that time, but it was just, I was able to focus on the right thing to reach my potential in the 5K. Whereas I think a lot of the people we work with, it's like they're on that marathon training hamster wheel and they're expecting a breakthrough in the 5K, and it's probably not going to come unless their aerobic capacity changes a ton during that marathon training.
Exactly.
But for, I coach a lot of people who are maybe like in that Boston qualifying range, and like you're really inching close to that law of diminishing returns. Like once you're already kind of in that like sub 325, sub 320 range for a female, and you're in your 30s and 40s, like you're getting pretty close. And so to really get to that next level, maybe it's to break 20 in the 5K, they might have to take some time off from marathon training to really hone in on that anaerobic to reach that goal. But even then, sometimes I feel like that can maybe put more pressure on people, and I've seen breakthroughs happen when people aren't necessarily trying. So maybe it is
Right.
we throw the 5K in middle of marathon training.
Honestly, yeah,
there's less pressure.
When I ran my 5K PR, it was like a fun race. I wasn't even sure I was going to do it till the morning of. It was one of those, like, I was just out of college and I just decided to go. And, you know, you got to have fun with it. And that's the thing about the 5K is like, you can't take it too seriously. And I think the more experience you get with it, you maybe like enjoy it in a different way, because it is so short. And so sometimes you finish it and you almost feel like, if you're so used to running longer races, you finish a 5K, you got the rest of the day, you're like, wow, I actually feel okay. Like, remember those times we went and did those 1 mile races? And then you're done after 5-6 minutes and you're like, what was this? I spent an hour and a half just driving here, waiting, warming up. And it's just so different. And so I think you have to appreciate the fact that it is going to be different. It's a different strategy. It's a different type of discomfort. It is a lot more short term. And yeah, I think not putting pressure on yourself is really the key, especially if you're not super experienced.
Right. With that being said, when it comes to the pacing strategy, I feel like in the marathon, a lot of people just like their goal is to finish, or maybe they're in 4-hour shape and they just want to have a positive experience, right? So they're like, oh, my pacing plan, I'll start at 10-minute pace and we'll just see what happens, right? When it comes to the 5K, when you develop your racing plan and your pacing plan for things, it's almost like even splits is the way to go. So yeah, you might want to do slight negative splits, but we're not talking. So like if you wanted to run 7-minute pace for a 5K, I recommend going out at like 7:01, 7:03.
Right.
Especially, if there's hills and stuff, like obviously factor that in because that's going to change your pacing, but you pretty much like go out on pace.
Yeah.
My big thing is don't go out too fast. And that's what happens with a lot of people is they don't put like a speed limit on the first 400. Like in 5Ks, I'll look down the first 400 meters and I'm like, what's happening? I'm going faster than mile pace. Like I need to back off. And everyone goes out that hard. And I'm like, there's no way everyone here today is going to be running a 17-minute 5K. But that's the pace that a lot of people are going out on in some of these rinky-dink 5Ks. But then, by the mile mark, that's not the case anymore. So I think the biggest thing with pacing is set a speed limit. Start a little bit further back so you're not sucked out with that pack that's going out at 5:30 pace or whatever. Even if that's not their intended race pace, people, they just go out fast. So start appropriately with where you think you want to be in the race, maybe a little bit further back. If you're more the mid-pack, don't necessarily follow that advice because you don't want to be like weaving in and out of people, right? So make sure you're in an appropriate spot. And then when it comes to glancing at your watch, I would just kind of set it and look at it and make sure you're not going too fast. And if you're like, whoa, it says I'm going like way too fast, you probably are going way too fast. So just trust that your watch is correct and really practice that speed limit because you can correct it the first 400 meters, but if you go 800 plus meters at that pace, your race is kind of toasted. And I've done that so many times, so I'm just sharing that's actually extremely useful. Like, think of best outcome case. You don't want to come through the 800 meter mark any faster than that. Not even by like a second.
Yeah, for sure. And I know it seems like a lot of my athletes, the ones that do want to dabble in the 5K, that they seem to find one that's on the track. I don't know if that's becoming more popular, like around, bigger metro areas or like places where there's like a college campus or bigger run organizations that put these, races on. But, it's something that I think is helpful in terms of learning how to pace is if you have that track, because you could do a check-in right at 200 meters or 400 meters and really set that speed limit. And the other thing to think about too is if you're doing a 5K on the road and you've done all your speed workouts on the track, sometimes it can be hard to assess the effort or the pace that you're going during the race if you're not super used to it. So That's why I like mixing in some fartlek stuff on the road as well as doing intervals on the track. But yeah, just some thoughts. I think the race strategies is going to vary based on weather, level of competition, what you know about the course, all of these factors. So
Yeah, and then mastering the art of the finishing kick. So if you've kind of reached mile 2 and you realize like today's not your day, like this is gonna just be surviving, like push as hard as you can to the finish, that's fine. But if you are like really going for it, you reach mile 2, you're like, this is terrible, but I'm not completely slowing down at this point, right? Then it's probably a good day for you, right? If you reach mile 2 and you're not slowing down, that's good. So what you want to do is kind of conserve a little bit for that finishing kick. Maybe that's because you want to place in your age group. Maybe you just want to like come in finishing strong. But I always think it's good to practice finishing like the last bit of the race, finishing it hard. And so maybe that means you adjust a little bit in the middle because what you don't want to happen, you feel good at mile 2 and then you're like, wow, I can start my kick now. And then you reach mile 2.5. You don't want to be 0.6 miles to go and all of a sudden be feeling not good. You just want to like make sure you're in like that groove spot until you hit about a little over mile 2.5. Do not start your kick until you're at, like, I mean, don't even think about speeding up till you're at mile, like, almost 2.7. Because that's a long time. A 1K, the last K of a 5K.
Right. Yeah, this is a fun kind of topic for me because I feel like I've been watching high school track races and cross-country meets for years, and I've seen a lot of fast kicks, right? And so even coaching athletes, I see in training peaks, if they're on a 5K, I can see, on the Garmin the splits, if it's like 3.12 or 3.08, whatever it is, I can always see that point, that distance over the 3 mile mark is always pretty fast for most people, right? Because they do tend to save some for the kick. Once in a while you see someone that it's like a complete slowdown, right, and the crash and burn, but that's pretty rare. So I think mastering the kick, though, that this is something that you want to work on in training, right? So some of my favorite interval workouts would be, or that I have maybe adults do, would be like 400 meters, where the first 400 or the first about 250 is at 5K pace. So you're running just less than 3/4 of a lap, right? So you're running until you get halfway around the second curve. That's where you're going to start to turn on the switch. So it's like you're doing a workout. You're doing it at 5K pace, but the last 150, you're going to flip a switch and all of a sudden pick up your pace to like mile pace. And so by doing that, what you're doing is you're signaling, okay, it's go time, right? And we did this back with high school kids who were trained for the mile and the 2 mile. We would do 250s that were progressive. So 250 yards is a little bit more than a half a lap. And it would just be progressive, where we build all the way around the corner. And by the time we get to that final straightaway, they hit it like basically 98 to 100% on the final straightaway, final 100 meters. And so by doing workouts like that, I think what you're doing is tapping into that strong finish, right? The mental toughness that is required to tell your body, okay, it's go time for these 20 seconds or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's definitely a fun thing, I think, when you get to that area, that part of the race, and you can see the finish because you know you're almost done. And yeah, those are some of my favorite workouts. I'd probably do a lot of 5K pace until the final 100 meters. Then I'd say hammer down to your mile pace.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes when people see the finish, they slow down because it's like they know it's there and they've kind of checked out. But I think when you do a lot of workouts like that, and you train yourself that, okay, at the end, like, we're going to finish hard, that's really good. And I think it keeps you really mentally focused the whole time. Like, my big thing whenever I'm doing a race or a 5K is I'm always, like, waiting until I see that sign. And in my head, I'm just like, okay, when's the finish line coming? And that's my cue to really, like, turn it up, because I treat it almost like this is a stride. I always envision when I'm doing strides at the end of my run, like really picking it up, using every muscle fiber that I have left and sending it into that next gear. And even if, I'm having a bad day, I still try to maybe conserve something for the finish line so that I can show to myself, hey, I can still finish this race strong, rather than, like jogging it in or feeling sorry for myself at the finish line because it's not really a great feeling when you maybe positive split a 5K. So I think this is something that anyone can incorporate, even if you're not having a great race. Maybe you dial it back that third mile and you save something for when you do see that finish line again. You're able to speed back up and finish strong. And then the last part of this podcast was about how to fuel your fire, paying attention to your nutrition and hydration in the days leading up to the race. Proper fueling is essential for optimal performance. And in the 5K, it's a lot different than a marathon. So when we're talking marathon training, we're talking a lot about taking gels and hydration and everything. And so in a 5K, it's a little different. You don't necessarily need to take a gel. Some people, they like the gels before, maybe like a caffeinated gel to get you going. I can't say that I've taken a gel before a 5K, but I think the morning before, just having like the typical breakfast that sits well with me and maybe a little snack hour and a half before, and staying hydrated is definitely key. Making sure you hit up those porta potties before too, so that you're feeling comfortable and not having to go to the bathroom mid-race, because that would be not great.
Yeah, I think part of this to me is like your approach, everything you do race morning to set yourself up for a good race. And obviously fuel is important to have a good breakfast so that you're not going to be hungry right before your race, right? The biggest thing I think that's different about the 5K is the warm-up. So we start the race and you're going fast, and so it's important that you do a mile, warm-up. Some, depending on the level you're at, it might be a half mile, or it could be up to like 2.5 miles even. I've had some athletes go 2 to 2.5 miles for a warm-up. So I would say, you need to do pretty much it's all easy pace warm-up with a slight progression maybe at the end, and then you could stop and do like dynamic drills, because you really want to get the blood flowing and the muscles activated before you start doing some faster strides. And you might see this towards the front of a 5K race. You might see a lot of like elite looking athletes doing strides and sprints, and they're kind of going like back and forth, right? And that's what they're doing, is they're doing anywhere from 20 seconds to a minute kind of pickup, just to get their legs and their heart rate pumping, so that when the race starts, it's not a shock, right? And so the warm-up becomes really key, really important. And yeah, I think throughout the warm-up, you want to feel good. You don't want to have any GI issues. And so if you kind of do a similar approach with your workouts, I think you're going to know what sits well with you. You're going to learn about how much to consume the morning of or the night before, that sort of thing. So in terms of liquids, I think that's really key, because I've had to, hit the portal like within 10 minutes of a race starting before, and that can be sometimes stressful if there's a long line and that sort of thing.
Right. I was laughing a little bit when you talked about the warm-up. I just remember the first time I ever was involved in being coached, my coach told me we were going to do a time trial, and I was like, all right, and I was like getting kind of like hyped up and stuff, and he's like, now I want you to do a warm-up. And I said no. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't want to get tired before.
Waste energy.
Because honestly, though, like when you go to a 5K and you see the people warming up, it's maybe like 10 people, 20 people out of the...
Yeah. Small amount.
And I think if you're not really immersed in the running community that much, you might look at those people thinking, what are they doing? Like, you're here to run a 5K and you're warming up. And I just remember that coach, I was like, no. And he told me, hey, you actually do need to go warm up. And I said, I'm no. And he said, okay, just jog really, really slow, and you can just do it for like 4 minutes. So if that's where you're at, you just do this super slow jog, walk situation. Whatever makes you feel like you're not getting tired, right? So you mentioned like a 2.5 mile warm up for some of your athletes, which is what some people need depending on the level.
Right.
But if you're new to warm up, it doesn't matter what pace you are. If you're just new to warm ups in general, because at the time I was running like 7-minute miles, but I was like, I'm not doing a warm up. Just do something light, If you've never done anything, do 3 to 5 minutes. Jog it up. Just do some drills. Just do drills, right? And what are drills? We have a ton on our Instagram page. There's a bunch of drill exercises on our YouTube. You can even just Google like running drills. Maybe it's just butt kicks, high knees, doing something, because like you probably drove there in a car. You're not loose. You just want to make sure everything's loose, so that when you start running fast, it's not a complete shock to your body and your heart rate doesn't go sky high. If you're already warmed up, it's going to be easier for your body to kind of adjust into those faster paces. And I definitely wasn't a believer of this. Like, I remember thinking that makes no sense. Like, I'm so skeptical. Like, what was this, 15 years ago? But really, it does help with your performance. And it's definitely important to warm up. And then obviously doing a cool down as well. And I think for some athletes, right, that's a really long cool down. And for other athletes, that might just be walking to your car. It depends on your fitness level and everything. But the biggest thing is try to think about your post-race recovery. I know there's been times where we've done 5Ks where that ends with a beer tent and getting drinks. And I don't really think that's optimal for recovery, right? You want to think, how can I rehydrate? How can I slowly cool down so that it's not a complete shock to my body and really recover for the next one?
Yeah, as you're talking there, I'm just kind of thinking about some of the 5Ks we've done over the years, and maybe this is a result of my years of growing up as a high school athlete and college athlete, but I'd always warm up in different shoes than what I race in. And I think that just helps with getting in the right mindset, right? Like, in order to run fast, you have to feel fast. And so it's helpful to, have your little bit of time to just get in the zone, right? Whether you listen to music or whatever it is. So you do a little warm-up jog, and then maybe you do some light stretching. And that's where I swap out my shoes. Usually that occurs within about 20 minutes of your race starting. And think back to track meets, you see the same thing. Kids go off, they run a few laps or run on the street, come back, then they lace up their spikes. That's when they do their dynamic drills and their fast stuff, and then they're primed and ready. And so you want to think about that. What can you do to feel primed and ready to go? And I love the 5K because I feel like a lot of adults, they tend to gravitate towards that marathon distance just because it's a different type of challenge, right? Or maybe they want to do the majors or qualify for Boston. Mm-hmm. But the 5K is really special because it's that distance race where it is far, but you can still run really fast, and 20 to 30 minutes and you're done. And I think you can really challenge yourself and feel fit if you get to a place where you've improved a lot at this distance. You can feel really strong and confident, and that's what I love about the distance.
Yeah, and according to Steve Magnus, who's a great running coach, author, everyone knows he has legends,
Speaker, yeah.
It's harder to race a 5K than to race a marathon. That's his opinion, which I find interesting. But everyone has their own opinion, right? And so sometimes we think the 5K is harder, sometimes we think the marathon's harder. And honestly, I'm not really sure which one I think is harder at the moment, right? I think they're all hard if you race them. I don't think it necessarily has to be one is harder than the other. I think it can be, they're as hard as you make them, right? You can go all in, train 100-mile weeks for this 5K if you're elite, and maybe do the same for a marathon, right? So I hope you're all fired up and ready to crush your next 5K. Remember, it's not just about the miles, it's about the speed that you bring to those fast miles. If you're looking for personalized coaching to help you develop a 5K training plan that maximizes your speed and performance, head over to www.runforprs.com to learn more about our coaching programs and sign up for a free 7-day trial working with a run coach. Again, that's www.runforprs.com. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, run fast and run strong.